Hi, my name is Crystal Buckhalter, and I work with Jews for Jesus. I remember when I was a little girl saying my prayers to God before I went to bed. I was really in love with the stories from my childhood Bible, and I remember thinking to myself that I wanted to be a leader of my people, like Moses or David or Daniel. And I just couldn't understand why there weren't any more Jewish prophets in the world. I was very fiery about God's love for my people. So I decided that I was going to step up to the plate and lead people for God. Now at the time, I was about 5 years old, so I thought that I was going to be the first female president. But my path took a little bit of a different turn. I was being raised primarily by my mother, and as a result, my Jewish grandparents, and everybody wanted me to have a bat mitzvah. So when I turned 8, I was off to Hebrew school and I joined the children's choir, and I loved it. I loved going to school after school because I thought I was going to be a leader of my people. Well, it didn't take long before my cantor took notice of me. He noticed that I had this great passion for Jewish music and liturgy and singing, and I quickly became his little protege. He decided that one day I might be able to take over for him, and I was honored, because not only was he widely respected as a cantor, but also as a former opera singer. So I had this great teacher and promoter, and before I knew it, I was performing all over the Detroit Jewish community. I was doing spots on the local news channels. I even got interviewed by the Jewish News. So, do I really need to tell you how my grandmother was kvelling? She still is, honestly. But when I turned 13, I had my bat mitzvah, and I was asked pretty quickly to come on staff at my synagogue. And I started working there 6 days a week, very closely with my rabbis. And I did start to notice there was a little bit of a difference between my rabbis and those prophets of old that I so admired, that were so fiery for God. Well, about that time, my father, who is not Jewish, started calling himself a Christian. And I noticed him start to change. I started hearing more and more about you-know-who, that nice Jewish guy, Jesus, whom we Jews were not supposed to believe in. Well, I was intrigued. I thought it was great that my dad had something so positive in his life that he was so passionate about. Well, the next thing I know, and completely unrelated, my mother starts going to church and wants to get baptized. My mother, who always made such a big deal about being Jewish, wanted to get baptized. And I thought, how un-Jewish is that? But I thought, okay, whatever, Mom. There's nothing wrong with Jesus, but I'm going to be a leader of the Jewish people. And well, those two things, they just don't go together. Still, I remained a little disappointed that my rabbis didn't more resemble those fiery prophets of old, made worse by the fact that they didn't seem to have as much interest in the Bible as I did. In fact, I remember at one particular seniors service, when I'd started singing regularly at my synagogue, I had to answer questions about an event in King David's life because my rabbi didn't know the answer. Well, I started to be more and more intrigued by Christians who knew so much about my Jewish Bible. It was a few years after that that my aunt and uncle on my father's side invited my brother and I to a Christian concert. And I'd heard some Christian music at that point, so I thought it might be fun. Well, in the middle of the concert, the lead singer stopped to talk to the audience. He said that Jesus, Yeshua, had died for our sins, that he was buried, and that he actually rose from the dead as proof that God had accepted his payment for our sins. He also said that was exactly what my Jewish prophets said that he would do. Well, to my shock and amazement, nothing in me rejected that statement. I'd heard about Jesus for years at that point, and somewhere along the way, I'd unconsciously accepted that that might be true. But that singer said something that I hadn't ever heard before. He asked the throngs of people in that auditorium, "Have you ever asked Jesus into your heart? If you believe all of that, What's stopping you? And that question went straight to my heart. And the answer was nothing. Nothing was stopping me. At that moment, something just clicked. I realized not only was Jesus what I had been praying for all those years, he was actually who I had been praying to. So I received Jesus as my Messiah that day. And something happened to me at that moment that I can only really describe as warm water welling up inside of me and running over like a fountain. It was in that moment that my very God, the same God who came over King David when he said, "My cup runneth over," that same God came over me that day, and he hasn't left me since. Truthfully, it doesn't always feel the same, but I'm always conscious that he's there, mysteriously in control, and it's such a relief. I have to be honest, though. I was a little concerned a few years later when I was asked to leave my synagogue because of my beliefs. But there were other Jews out there that I didn't know about before. Jews who believed that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah of the Jewish people, and if anybody who wants to have a relationship with God, like those fiery prophets of old did. And I'm glad to sit here and say to you today that I am a Jew who believes in the Messiah of the Jewish people and of anybody else who wants that relationship with God. And it's through Yeshua that I'm truly learning what it means to be a leader of the Jewish people.